Hello and welcome to The Diverse Bookshelf with me, Samia Aziz. On this show, I interview incredible authors doing a deep dive into important themes and issues while talking all things books. On today's episode, I'm talking to the incredible Sabba Khan. Sabba Khan is a born and bred East Londoner whose work as a visual artist, graphic novelist, and architectural designer is framed by her experience as a second-generation immigrant. Originally trained as an architect at Central St. Martin's and the University of Westminster, Sabba weaves design ideas into her art practice. Collaborators for Sabba's comics work include the British Council, SOAS, NHS, London Borough of Newham, JCWI, and the British Library. Sabba's debut graphic novel, The Roles We Play, explores how her lived experience has been informed by her family's migration history and the intergenerational trauma one can face if that history is largely unacknowledged. Awards include the Jhalak Prize 2022, Broken Frontier Breakout Talent 2021, as well as The Role We Play's selection among Guardian's Best Books of 2021. The Roles We Play is available in the US with Street Noise Books under the title What is Home, Mum? Thank you so much, Sabba, for joining me today.
Thank you, Samia. Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited. How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. I've just come back from holiday, so I'm like post-holiday buzz. And yeah, glowing with the suntan and having fun.
That's so good. So you actually sent me The Roles We Play just before publication last year, and I have loved it. And I have to admit, like I don't read a lot of graphic novels. I actually think I've only ever read one before this, which was Palestine by Joe Sacco.
Yeah.
And I absolutely loved it. So I can't wait for us to dive in. So please introduce The Roles We Play to us.
Okay. Yeah, it's good to hear that there's a lot of people that are first-time graphic novelists with the readers with The Roles We Play, and that's really heartwarming to hear that. So The Roles We Play is my debut graphic novel. It's autobio, so it comes from my personal lived experience. I'm a Londoner. I'm an East Londoner. I've lived in London all my life, and I still live in Newham. And I'm very close to my family. But I've had lots of I feel like my journey through life has been very cerebral and very like it's all been in my head. And it's something that I haven't really ever had the chance before the book. I hadn't really ever had the chance to take stock of and just sort of make sense of. And I think, when I first started the book, my first year into being married with my partner, and I think it really came from, having made lots of different alternative decisions to the ones that were presented to me in my life. Like, they weren't as traditional or more, or even the set route that was sort of put to me as the way a Pakistani Muslim Meerpuri girl goes about her business. And then so I'm with this partner of mine, and he's English and he's converted to Islam, but he's come from an atheist background, and I've moved in with him, and I've gone through this epic journey with my family and, sort of taking them along with me. I'm the youngest of 5 in my family, so I really wanted to, I didn't want to disrupt the family with my decisions and with my passions and with my feelings, and I wanted them to sort of be with me and for me to take them along the ride with me and for them to still support me and love me. And I think a lot of that came from some of the childhood experiences that I had in my life with, seeing some of my older brothers and sisters go through arranged marriages and successful and unsuccessful, and, just like the roots, and not only my siblings, but also my cousins as well. So that's the other layer. We are a large intergenerational, multi-generational family, and we all live in East London, and I've got my puppos and my halas and my chachus and my mamus, and we're all, we'll see each other almost every weekend, and every Eid and every birthday, every marriage, every funeral, every sort of major life event. We're all there together, coming together, and That's been going on since the 60s. And so now there's over 100 of us. And that's the sort of backdrop as well. So there's a lot of like chaos. There's lots of different pulls and pushes. And then me at the center of it, and how I sort of, kind of balance that, frame that for myself. And really the book, it was that space for me to unpack and unpick and, just sort of sort out and make sense of, really just take stock of why things are the way they are for me and why I've made the decisions, and sort of just formalizing things. And the reader is taken on that journey with me. So very personal, very vulnerable in certain moments as well.
Yeah, definitely. Really. I mean, there are some pages that are like standout, impactful, like massive. And we go on this journey with you throughout your life. And even I think before, because there's like a kind of flashback where your mum is telling you what happened in Meadwood in the 70s and talk about partition. Really brilliant. But a graphic novel is, I feel like it's such a different form of literature. And in some ways, it feels really intense. And you wouldn't necessarily think that, because you're like, oh, there's loads of illustrations, there's loads of pictures. But actually, like, it's like a bombardment of information, because you're soaking in the visual side of it, but also the text. Like, you have speech in there, you have descriptions, you have text, like an actual book. So what was that like? Because I know you're an artist, so your primary form of expression is drawing. Yeah. But in order to get the message across, you had to get the words in there as well. And how did you do it in a way to try and not overwhelm the reader as well?
Yeah. Oh, Samia, that's such a brilliant question. So there's a lot of little things that feed into this response of mine. So I come to expression visually, like you said. Architecture is visual as well. You communicate things through drawings, and that's what I've been doing in university for 5 years. I'd been honing my visual communication skills, and also before the book I was doing lots of little self-published zines where I was drawing. And I've always loved like children's books literature, and I've like, for me, one of the first books that I read was Blankets by Craig Thompson and Persepolis, and all of the big graphic novel hitters. And I absolutely fell in love with the medium. And that was when I started my part one, my first BA at Central St. Martin's. And they had this whole section in the graphic novel, in their library, that was the graphic novel section. And I ended up just reading the whole selection that they had. And I think it was at that point where there was this silent agreement with myself, where I was just like, if I'm going to express something, it's going to be in this medium. And the way I talk about it, and I think others that are within this very niche genre as well, they talk about it as well in this way. And I think it's really beautiful, is that the graphic novel, it defies me. It's a different medium. It's not a book. It looks like a book, and it's got pages like a book, but it's almost in between a book and a film or an animation. It sort of straddles these, it's giving you visuals, it's giving you sequence like a film is. And you read it like, you can read a graphic novel really quickly within 2 hours if you just sat there and you just like plowed through it. A big film, you're just like, you sit in front of a film and you like absorb this stuff and you go through this story, and the story can be incredibly complex and it takes you in all these different places and jumps through time, but you get it really quickly. And versus a book where you sit there and you read it, and it kind of moves between those two spaces, the graphic novel. And I think that's what made it. It's so interesting that you said did you say it's like an assault? Like, it's just so full on.
Yeah.
I love that description, because it does feel like that, right? Because you're like, your mind is like, do I read the text first, or do I absorb the pictures, or how do I do it? And I think especially with the way I did it as well. So a lot of other graphic novels, you'll see them and it's very visual, and a lot of the like storytelling happens through dialogue and action. So there'll be you have your page and it'll be full of ink. You've got these characters and it's very paneled and it's very structured, and people are moving in time, and there's sequence and there's dialogue. And I think my book doesn't really do that either. Like it's not straight action and sort of speech bubbles and people telling the story through physical sort of representation. It's very cerebral, it's very philosophical, it's all about ideas and feelings. And so I'm like morphing through like symbolic stuff. Like I draw a lot of stairs and architecture and people falling and going through sieves and being caught by massive hands, and there's all this like, it's just like a really weird surreal kind of landscape. And I think that makes it, and also it's really pared back as well. And I think that was the other thing. That was a really conscious decision on my part. And I think that came from my kind of architectural training of like, what's the sort of minimum that I need to get this feeling across, both in the drawings and also in the words that I was using. And I really wanted to use the absence of things as well. Like I wanted the pages to feel sparse, and I wanted, especially in certain moments, like there's this one moment where there's a racist attack that happens to me as a child, and there's a double page spread where there's almost nothing, and that page where, you know, and it actually says nothing as well, and it's very, like, for me it was almost like the emptiness of the page should give the weight of the gravity of the situation as well, and people should feel it, like the courage of like not putting anything on the page, and it's sort of that sinking feeling for them to sort of be put into that space. So it's kind of like working with all these different things, and that's what shaped it.
Absolutely. And so you spent 6 years on it, and you mentioned in the book as well that you went for therapy and, you know, went on this journey yourself of healing. Yeah. So I imagine then that 6 years later, or even like 2 years later or 3 years later from when you started it, you must have been in a different place, and maybe the way that you viewed some of your earlier experiences may have changed. But then you'd already written, or you'd already drawn and written part of the book. Did you ever feel like, did you ever go back and change anything, or did you ever want to change anything? What was that like? Because yeah, I feel like, I mean, even writers must have a similar issue sometimes when they get to the end of the book and they've developed as a writer. They may want to go back and change the beginning, but because your experience, so much of it is inward, it's about how you have sort of, you know, related to and understood and unpacked your own experiences and trauma and happy things as well, how that may have changed your perception from the beginning.
So again, another excellent question, Samia. That was something that I really battled with that, and I think you're totally right. I think it's something that plagues autobio as a genre. You know, when do you draw a line in the sand, and when do you say, okay, now I'm going to start reflecting? This, you know, when is the past? Because, you know, the past comes into the present and you're reflecting. And I think I recently read Open Water, and there was a really beautiful line at the beginning of the book where he talks about how that very act of recalling a memory means that the memory, you've sort of brought it into the present, but you're then, by giving it a recollection, and then the next time you recall it, you're recalling the previous recollection as opposed to the original memory. And so you sort of move further and further away from the memory, because you're then just in this act of sort of recalling and remembering. And there is that sort of like weird kind of thing where the moment you make something tangible, like that memory of my when I did the life drawing piece, that chapter in the book, like I now don't think about the memory itself, I think about my depiction of it, and it's just really interesting. It's really it's just funny how the human mind works. So there is that act of recollecting. And whilst I was doing the book, so when I first started the book, it started off as a series of short stories, and the first one was very much about the process of me going through questioning my hijab, questioning my visible Muslim identity, because at that point that was such a powerful part of my it was so close to me. It had happened very recently. It was something that I was really grappling with. I had just met Mark as well, and I had moved from being a working class Pakistani girl who just hangs around with those kinds of people that she feels comfortable with, to then being with a white middle class man had catapulted me into this like, you know, space where there's like white private educated people who are very sort of, you know, intellectually, you know, kind of sophisticated, and I'm sort of competing with them, and this sort of sudden vulnerability that I've moved social circles, and the people around me are no longer going to understand my roots. They're not going to understand where I've come from. They're not going to understand my challenges. And that's just something that's very isolating. It makes you feel very lonely. It makes you feel like, you know, what have I done? I've let go of the people that actually recognized me and saw me and knew me, and now I've moved into this new sphere. So a lot of those first moments were about that. And it started to move beyond that. But it was always short stories. When I came to the publishing deal, Myriad were like, okay, we love your concept. You can change it. It doesn't have to continue as these short stories, but it's up to you. You know, we also love the short story concept and things like that. And there was this period where it was about 6 months where I tried to unpack these like short bursts of memories and tried to make it more of a sort of chronological thing, or something that's a little bit more of a linear journey that people can follow from beginning to end. And I really struggled with that, because I think it's because going back to that idea of like, where do you draw the line in the sand? At what point do you begin? At what point do you end? So yeah, the short stories, I tried to unpack the short stories and see if I could do it in a slightly different way. I gave that a period of about 6 months where I tried lots of different things, and I just kept coming back to these pockets of moments. And I think it's because it worked for me. It, you know, I didn't have to draw that line in the sand. I didn't have to tell myself like, okay, this is the period that I'm going to reflect on. I mean, obviously others can do it. Other people will do it differently. You know, there's people that will be like, okay, there's a period in my time that I really want to explore, and it's an event that has happened. But what I was trying to do was encapsulate the migrant experience. And that was something that was very forefront to my mind. I wanted people to feel how I felt, both presently, but also in the past. And that's something that's so difficult to, you know, get a hold of and get a grip of and actually sort of formalize. Whilst I was looking at structures, and I think part of the reason why I received the publishing deal was because I described my story as a petal-like structure. And the idea was that you'd have these small stories and they all would circumnavigate around each other, but they'd all feed into this larger central concept. They're all independent. They all begin and end in their own, their own little world, but they're all connected, and together they send this universal message, not necessarily universal, but this unified message of the book, what the message of the book was. And I think for me, the message of the book was the migrant diaspora, Muslim female experience, second generation experience. And then around that were all of my experiences, but also some of my mum's experiences, my grandma's experiences, my dad's experiences, my siblings' experiences. And they all kind of fed into each other. So I had those. And then around that, and that sort of did it for me. But then you'll notice that in the book, I have these pink pages. And the book starts off with the pink pages. And that's where it's present day Sabba. That's narrator page. That's narrator Sabba. So I weave through present day. And that allowed me to both jump into the past, go into things that were happening in the past. But then always I had this device, the narrator page device, where I could be reflective, I could be critical, I could be questioning, I could bring in concepts that I was reading on like the Runnymede Trust, or, you know, there's lots of different things that have been written around, you know, how migrants, there's this whole piece around assimilation and the different ways that migrants come in, and me trying to critique that and unpack that and be like, you know, why is it that we're always looking at what migrants do? What about the host culture? Why don't we, you know, talk about that? And there's all this sort of stuff. And then going, you know, there's other like Maslow's hierarchy of needs and questioning that, and, you know, what's going on with that. So And that's where the narrated page always allowed me to have memories, but also have that space to critique. And then in terms of like going back to, you know, like having something that's like 6 years old, and then something that, because I definitely had that, Samia, so that's where it's like a great insight. By the end of the 6 years, I was like, you know, I was a lot more sophisticated with my drawing. So this is another thing. When I first started, I was still trying to shake off like my mum's voice of like, you're not really allowed to draw people and faces, and what are you doing? And, you know, like I was still trying to shake that off. So my drawing at the beginning was very sort of, for me, very crude and very like, there's also a reason why it's quite simple as well, because it feels like I've not had that sort of space to evolve the like hand-drawn line craft. You know, like architectural drawing is very like functional, it's very, you know, like construction orientated. You know, it's shelter as opposed to human form. So that was quite an interesting like journey that I went on. But I like to see it as embracing that journey. So I've actually still got some of those drawings from 6 years ago have made it into the final book, and I'm really proud of them, and I love them because they show that journey of the fact that actually, you know, it's not a linear journey. Nothing about the book is linear. There's going to be bits of the drawings that are, you know, crude. There's others that are a lot more sophisticated. There's others that are simple. There's others that are really pared back. And I'm going to embrace all of it as an entirety, because it's a journey that I've gone on, and that's what you're going on. That's what I'm taking you on. I'm taking you on multiple levels of journeys, not just the story of me, but also the evolution of me as an artist as well, and the way I tell those stories.
I want to talk about this theme of space, like physical space, because you talk about it a lot in the book. In fact, it kind of opens up with something related to space as well. So you talk about for a long time not having your own room. You used to share a bed with your mum, and then you also talk about, so your mum used to like make clothes with like a seamstress, I guess. And you talk about the chair on which she sits, and I love that bit because you're just like, you know, the way that it supports the soft of her back. But you also talk about the fact that you're unable to imagine or visualize your father's space, the spaces that he occupied. And it made me think a lot, because I think there is obviously a huge influence with class and financial stability with regards to how much physical space we have. And you lived in a multi-generational extended family with many siblings and uncles and aunts and grandparents around. And I think a lot of first generation immigrants lived like that. You know, we hear stories of how people were living 15 people in a room. They couldn't afford to live anywhere else. They didn't know anything else. You explore that really well in your book. So can you unpack it a little bit?
I get really emotional about space and physical space, and I think that's part of the reason why I did architecture, because I think I'm so fascinated by the fact that the very act of walls and ceiling and floor, you're making space, you're making shelter for yourself. How big is that going to be? How small is that going to be? Where are the openings going to be? How are you going to enter them? There's all these like really like deep philosophical things where they impact, the space impacts you in terms of like how it shifts your behavior, but then you're in relationship with it because you've defined, you know, if you're lucky enough to be able to define it or, you know, give it some parameters, you're then in this like weird conversation with it. Like, it's really, really interesting. I think as you were talking and posing the question, it got me thinking about the idea that the Western construct of self, and actually like what we're responding to, the need for self-identification and self-actualization, is something that's very Western, and it's something that is pushed on us right from the get-go. And I think that conflict is the fact that our families have not had that at all. They've not been brought up with, or they've not been comfortable with the idea of self as the like dominant important thing. And like the fact that my mum and dad are like, you're our children, you're going to do our bidding, like their children are an extension of this wider conglomerate, this wider sort of enmeshed family, and we all work for each other. And and I've got this in the book as well, if we all take care of each other, then we're all kind of held in this kind of space. There's no one person that rises to the top. There's no one dominant person, but we're all sort of just like gently taking care of each other. And I guess that's more communal, that's more collective. My Moroccan sister-in-law, like I remember when she came to the UK, and when we went to see her in Morocco, they've got this open living room. They've got the kitchen, bathroom, and I think they've got a few other like storage rooms, but the living room would be the hosting room. But you know how like they'd have all these like sofas that were quite deep and loads of cushions, and they in the nighttime we all sleep here. Like they would all just sleep around, and she was just like, this is what we all do, like this is what Moroccan culture is. And don't hold me to that. There might be other Moroccans who are like, no, actually, we don't do that. But this is like I took her word, and I was just like, oh my god, like they all just. And my mum was like, yeah, we used to do that. Like they'd all just sleep together, like like in Pakistan, in rural Azad Kashmir, they'd have rooms, and all the rooms would have the munjis and the jarbays, and they'd all just sleep in these rooms, or they'd go out and they'd all sleep together. I went to Pakistan earlier this year as well, and they all had this, they'd redone the houses because they've got, they've got the financial means to improve their living conditions. And we were all in this like one massive hall space, and we we're all just sleeping together. And it's just completely different to the Western European, concept of each person has their own room. And that's kind of like messed with me a little bit, because it's just like, it kind of, I think for a long time, I always put the fact that I shared the room with my mum, I put that down to the fact that we didn't have enough space. And, it was something that this is just what the family did. And I think it's because it evolved in that way. We'd gone from having loads of people to slowly having less and less and less. But also it shifted as well, because then my brother got married and he had children, and then we had to make space for the children. And, there was always those elements of compromise. So I think I don't know, like there is a lot of going back to the idea of self and space and rootedness. I think that is really important. And I guess for me, I just want to be mindful of the fact that that's the construct that we live in. And it's something that I think, like, for me, it's like, yes, I'm second generation Pakistani, but I'm British. Like, we've all been brought up with these values, and self is so important. And we're all striving to really, create a strong sense of self-identity and really protect that. And that's especially as artists and writers and creatives, like that's the thing that we've got. And if we don't have that, then we're, then I don't know, we're doing this like desk job, or, we're not that sort of creative mind that's pushing all these thoughts and ideas. So I think for me as well, it's a really important part of my survival and my job as well. Like, especially now, I'm self-employed now, and I work as an artist, and also do architectural stuff with my partner, but so much of it is you as a person and what you're contributing to society as an individual. So I don't know, like, I feel like there's quite a loose and ambiguous response to your question, but I feel like it's a sense of space is important, because that's the construct that we live in, and we need to offer that space to our children, to cultivate it. But then equally, like in my book, I sort of subtly touch the fact that my mum and my arrangement was a form of protection for her as well. And when I go into that, it's kind of like it gets quite murky, and I feel like that was a service. Like, I feel like my childhood was a service to that. And to the fact that she didn't want to spend time with my dad, those intimate, nighttime hours, she didn't want to be with him. And actually being with me allowed her that protection and that space for her. And obviously, if either of us was a psychotherapist, they'd be like, oh, that's really unhealthy. And you're like, yeah, that is. But it's also like, that's the situation. Like, a lot of first generation mothers who've been in marriages that they weren't happy with, did that. And that was their survival. That was their way of navigating the only things in their lives that they could work with, and that was their children. How can I use my children to protect me? And and you see that in our communities, and that's a really heavy thing, because the mothers have been put into that place where they don't have the autonomy or the safety other than that way. And that's a bigger question that is beyond it starts from the bedroom, and it's just like, what's going on here? But then it's like this wider societal thing around how that first generation war was supported and were not supported, and were just sort of made to feel ostracized, or that actually the house becomes a prison where actually they've got to just work within the confines of what they've got within this house and try to make it work for themselves.
Yeah, I think it is context specific as well. Like, in sort of growing up in East London, our idea of having your own space, or having space where you feel safe and rooted, looks very different to in Pakistan.
Yeah.
So in Azad Kashmir, sort of like Muzaffarabad side, after the 2005 earthquake, I think most people wanted to feel safe, and it became, if we all sleep in the same room, we can all get out quickly if there's an earthquake. If someone isn't, on the other side of the house, and if that, if something happens over there, we're not worried about getting them out. We can all run.
Yeah.
And it becomes about safety. It becomes about survival. But that is a huge sense of being rooted. But it's difficult unless you're in that situation to really understand what that looks like.
Yeah.
And there's so many contexts like that as well, I guess. People living refugees and in war and all of that thing. Really, really fascinating, I think. And I think the issue why rootedness matters so much, I think, for us as well, is because although we as second generation immigrants have citizenship and red or blue passports now, we always feel like, but our citizenship is not stable. And I think that seeps into so much in our lives. Like, even if we have our own bedrooms, even if we have our own houses, our own walls and a roof over our head, this constant feeling that we could be uprooted at any time is so difficult to explain to people that don't know what that feels like. And even if nothing has actually happened, nobody has ever said to me that we can take away your citizenship, or and increasingly things do happen.
I think especially recently with Boris Johnson's lovely cabinet, like, more also there's so many scandalous things that have happened that tell all of us that you're actually less valuable and you belong less, and we're going to critique you, and we're going to observe you, and we're going to what you're about. And when Windrush scandal to Rwanda to so many things, it's like, oh gosh. And then the citizenship bill itself, I'm like, I've got dual nationality, I've got Pakistani nationality, like I could get kicked out if I did something wrong, like and then you're suddenly like, what's wrong, what's right? I'm obviously a law-abiding citizen, but it's just really interesting, like the doors, there's so many more doors that are closed to you, and the confines of the metaphorical space that you have is a lot less than someone who's white, middle class, and just instantly belongs. And
so what I particularly loved about your book is that it was really obvious that it was about a Mirpuri girl, I mean, what I mean to say is that you didn't just sort of say like, oh, I'm South Asian or I'm from Pakistan-ish. Like, it was really clear that you're from Meadwood. And the reason why I love that is because narratives about, say, South Asia, I feel are so lazy. When we see South Asia in the news, we see kind of India, Pakistan, we see very basic narratives about partition.
Yeah.
And actually, like, South Asia is so diverse.
Yeah.
Even if we just look at India, Pakistan, and the two Kashmirs, like, the diversity there is so huge. And the reason why it's even more important is because of the historical and the political situations in those places and the impact that has on people. Like, most people generally don't tend to know about the building of the Mangla Dam and the impact that had on thousands of people in Meadwood. Don't fully understand kind of what's going on in other parts of Azad Kashmir and what's going on in Indian administered Kashmir. And actually, it's so important that we bring those narratives forward. So I absolutely love the fact that this book is helping to contribute to this demand of really understanding and really talking about South Asia properly without being so lazy.
Yeah. And I think also, just to add to that, like, it's so critical for the British public to know that, specifically the British, like, not even the rest of Europe or the US, the British, because of the fact that the Mangla Dam triggered such a migration to the UK, and actually, 70% of the Pakistani population is Meadwoodi, is connected to Meadwood in some way. And, that it's that statistic where it's just like, why don't we have, like, Meadwoodi culture days, or like, stuff where there's a Meadwood museum, for example, in the UK? Like, there's so many of us, and I think it's just because we've historically been relegated to the working classes. Like, if I my family, there's only a handful of us in the 100 that I've spoken about that have gone to university. None of them have done like an arts or culture thing. I'm the only one that's done that. And it is, so far at least. I think in the future, inshallah, there'll be more. But it's really interesting because that's what I felt like. It came from a direct lack of going to university. There's pages in the book where I go to university and I see other people, and none of them, like, I've got like hundreds of people in my family. I know that there's people in Manchester, there's people in Reading, there's people in Birmingham, there's people in Yorkshire that we're connected to, and they're all part of the Meadwoodi diaspora. And there's so many, like, but going back to Meadwood, sorry, because that's the wider question. That was the drive. The drive was to give our Meadwoodi community across the UK a bit more of a cultural, literary voice as well. And I think that's where I got my mum to be the vehicle to talk about that, because, and it's just, the Samia is so interesting because I've got, like, that was in the 1960s, like from the 1940s to the 60s, there was this real period where it was happening. But half of my family moved to actual Pakistan. They moved out after the dam got built, and they started to identify themselves as Pakistani. And I've got cousins who are my blood cousins who are like, Mangla Dam, Meadwood, like, my dad doesn't talk about that. And it's because their dad was born after the born, because my mum was a little, so it's almost like generationally it's getting lost. The story of it is getting lost, and there's a self erasure that's happening. And I think it's because people don't want to talk about it, because the wider, the British psyche doesn't want to talk about it, the Indian psyche doesn't want to talk about it, the Pakistani psyche doesn't want to. There's no wider incentive to talk about it, and the only drive is those people that actually experienced it and know the root cause of it. And it's those early 50s, 60s generation of migrants that know and lived through it. And I think that's where, like, I kind of quite proudly wear the badge of being second generation, because I myself, with my mum speaking to her about it and my dad, And there did feel like there needs to be a recording, and there needs to be ways that we capture those experiences. I know there's other people, there's Tape Letters that are doing it as well, where that's an organisation that collects people's like cassette notes that they used to send each other and record each other, and that's a really nice thing. And I'm sort of involved in that as well, because it's just like, actually we need to hold on to these so that the generations that come know what has happened. And I think the Mangla Dam, part of history, and also how, sorry Sammy, I'm just like going on about it, but how relevant that is, how current day that is.
Of
like
course,
he talks about how the water crisis in Pakistan and India is what's fueling the conflict in Kashmir and dividing it. And there's so much like geopolitics that's around. And, I'm not really an academic. I don't really like, for me, it's quite, there's a lot that's there to understand. And it just doesn't get spoken about unless you're like super, you're a researcher and you're like really into it, and you're really looking at all of the stuff that's out there. But it's a lot, and the British psyche needs to know about it.
I really hope that there is more conversation happening, because of course that you're right, like so much of the contention between India and Pakistan is over Kashmir, which is fueled by the water issues as well, which links to the Mangla Dam, but also climate change and all of that and all of that happening as well. And
there's so many other things as well, right? Like it's trade routes as well. It's the fact you've got China right on top of you. You've got the Himalayas. You've got access to the sea. Access to I feel like it's beyond me to understand all of the factors that contribute to why Kashmir is still undisputed, especially like with the story of it in partition, the fact that it was never agreed upon at that point. And I think it's mad to me, the fact that there's bits of it that are owned by Pakistan, India, and China. And it's just, why is this a hot mess? Like, what's going on? And that was part of what was when I was drawing the maps. I was just like, this is wild. Why is this happening? And why don't we talk about it?
Yeah. And I think the thing that really gets to me about the issue with Kashmir is that it wasn't clear at times of at partition what was going to happen. It wasn't fully agreed upon, but there was an agreement that there was going to be a referendum of sorts. The problem with that referendum is that referendum has never included autonomy for Kashmir. It was always about India or Pakistan, which again is bizarre, because if you look at Kashmir, it's its own thing. Its people are different, its culture is different. It even has like politically, like Azad Kashmir has its own government. Like, it's very, very different, and yet it's just a power game.
Yeah, and people want their own autonomy. That's the other thing as well. Like, there's political parties that are just like, we just want to be on our own, but they're just, again, it's like, I don't know enough on like what's going on there, with Imran Khan and the wider politics of the actual country. It just feels like it's all just male patriarchal, pushing around, and I don't know if there's enough intervention. But then again, that's colonial stuff. I don't know. I don't know. It's just a hot mess. The whole thing is a hot mess.
It is quite a hot mess. But let's
go
back.
Like, we don't talk about it as diaspora. It's just like that, we talk about our identities, but we don't. There's a real sense of like not knowing the actual details.
So the roles we play obviously is autobiographical. Covers a lot of some really difficult things that you experienced as a child and growing up, and even as an adult, and like things that your siblings went through. How did you find the balance between talking about things that were painful and that were difficult, that maybe if an outsider was to look at may form judgments about your family? How did you balance that with the love that you clearly have for your family and wanting to really honor them and honor their stories? Because I can imagine that was hard. Really challenging.
Yeah, it was really, and the thing is, like, for me, I think whenever I put something that was really personal, I would always ask myself, it was always like, okay, if I'm going to put this out there, I need to move beyond the experience, and I need to start critiquing the experience, and I need to be able to look at the bigger picture. I need to contextualize it, and I need to give the characters in this experience lots of love and understanding and empathy, because when I would recollect it, I might not necessarily do it. So when I'm going into the memory and I'm thinking, this has happened and that was really difficult, and I've got this surge of emotion and I'm recollecting the feelings that it's created. But you also, when you have these experiences, you learn from them, and your life shifts. And I think a lot of the book is about looking at those shifts rather than, so the shifts are triggered by the experiences, but I think I wanted to be like, okay, this is the starting point. The experience is the starting point. That's what's triggered the change or the thing that has made me go in a different direction. And then it's like, what is that different direction, and where does that then take me? And I think for me, at least, I tell myself that the experience was used as a vehicle to illustrate and to talk about how the shifts happen and how people move in their values, in their thinking, in what's important to them, or even like unpacking faith as well. Like, there's this whole thing about the critiquing religion, but there were lots of stepping stones that led me to that point, and you can kind of see that. And I think that's where the experiences are used as those, like, this is what happened that then facilitated this change in thinking that then, sort of did that. I also, like, in the back of my mind, there's a lot of stuff that didn't go in the book. And if you're a member of my family and you look at the book, you will know that there's lots that I could have put in the book and I never did, because the things that did go in there had to have a purpose, and it was justified, because it was just like, okay, they are going to lead me down a way, rather than just sort of, for me, I think I want to sort of happy in knowing that I didn't just, open the secret closet door to my family, and I didn't just lay out all of the secrets, the sordid secrets of the Khan family. I don't think I did that. And I think I could have done that in certain way. I could have just, spilled the guts, spilled the beans, and just made myself feel better by doing that. But I think ultimately, that's where it's just like, if I do that, there is that element of uncovering, and that element of, just exposing people for the sake of what does it facilitate. And I think that was always the question that I was asking in talking about this moment that's quite vulnerable. What am I getting out of sharing it to the public? And that was a really hard process, and that's what kind of drove me, to depression and slight insanity whilst I was doing it, because I was constantly asking myself, like, and especially, as you said, people can take it out of context. People can get upset by it. There's possibilities of libel as well, defamation of character. And I didn't want to enter that space at all with any of my family members.
And you didn't want to hurt them either.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. I think for me, the book was like, this is going to be healing for me. And what does healing look like? And I think healing for me is when you zoom out of the emotional state and you look at what's going on and you try to understand, and you offer those characters different perspectives, and you say, and I think that's where, like, my mum and dad are, on the face of it, very traditional, conservative, Pakistani Muslim family household, and they've created that through their children and the environment in their house. But has it also been facilitated by the fact that actually they were demonized in the UK? There was lots of racism at the time, so they just closed ranks and just got really inner and insecure. And it's kind of offering my family different perspectives to look at themselves with. So hopefully it achieves that. And I think it does, at least for myself. Like, it's allowed me to see them as multifaceted, complex beings, I think.
That's really, really interesting. And how has writing the book changed your relationship with both, like, yourself and with your family, if it has at all?
Yeah, I think my mum and dad have really loved seeing themselves drawn as like cute little creatures. Well, they're not like, but you know, like I've drawn them in like these cartoony kind of ways, and they're always quite soft and almost like anime little. You know, they look like little cute people. Not that they're not cute; they are cute, but just sort of like amplifying that, and that's been really nice. I think the book itself as well, a bit like going back to the idea of like recollecting a memory and then you're just recollecting the recollection of the memory. Like I feel like it's done that for me, and I don't know if that's a good thing or not. Like I probably should talk to a psychotherapist about like of like recording. And I think a lot of these memories, I now think of the way I've captured the memory as opposed to the memory. There's a lot of, I think now that I've, there's 30 chapters and there's a whole load of memories that have gone into it, I'm starting to, like, the other things that didn't go into the book are starting to like really come out and get louder because I didn't give them that sort of public space.
Yeah, in your book as well, I think what I particularly liked is that there were things that happened in your life, incidences, that in the book you allude to, or you like do like a gentle nod towards, rather than giving us like extreme details. And I think that is a really nice way to still show love towards family members or whoever it was that that was involved in those situations, and also to I think to show as well your own healing and your own growth and your own understanding that sometimes we can't just look at a specific action in isolation. We need to understand it in the huge context, and we need to, and I think that's really great.
Yeah, definitely. And I think going back to that idea of the memory or the act, the actual physical action, then, when it's taken in and when it's put into a context and you give it a whole, you give it a different language, you come at it from a different angle, and you look at like, why did that happen? What was it that created that situation? And came after, then the situation itself is almost like inconsequential because you're looking at it as a trajectory of events and how people are forced into certain situations or how they make choices in different ways and what's presented to them. Yeah, so I think it gives us humanity, I think. It allows us to be people that are influenced by certain things, and as opposed to being a sum of our actions, we are people that are responding to different influences and different pushes and pulls of life. And I think that in itself gives us not an excuse, but it gives us a bit more leeway to be human, to be able to make errors, to not hold ourselves to this really high standard. And I think that high standard definitely comes from being a migrant, being critiqued in such wider societal ways, but also like faith as well. This idea of like, we're upstanding, we're the best of humanity, and it's just like, just let go of that. We're just human, and we're going to make errors, and we're going to be guided in different ways, but find ways to love each other and be able to move on and be able to heal from those kinds of things.
Yeah, because it does sometimes feel like we're forced to make a political statement just by our very own existence. And I 100% believe that like our lives and our identities are political, because I believe the personal is political anyway, but like, also because
especially if you're visibly Muslim, for example,
exactly,
you're politicized more than what you might want to be. And
exactly 100%, and we cannot take away from the fact that we have been so massively impacted by colonialism, by Islamophobia, by foreign policy, by all of these things. Of course, our identities are political, but that doesn't mean our existence needs to be politicized. And like sometimes I just want to be considered somebody that that likes to read books, not necessarily like someone that likes to read books about politics. Like I just want to be, and it feels like, you know, and that we are sometimes forced to make a political statement. And I wonder how you felt. Did you worry that like, or did you think that maybe your book was going to be taken like that as well?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think I was really worried. I was worried it'd be a bit too apologetic, I think, and a bit too. I was honestly worried about like my Muslim community peers, I think, because I thought I thought that because of my whole journey with faith, that I would be swinging too in the like catering to the white gaze world as opposed to actually doing something that's for my community. And that was a really hard balance because I am with a white middle class person. My very existence, the choices that I've made, architecture is a very white profession, and I've been in it for years. I took my hijab off. I very rarely wear shalwar kameez unless I have to now. And there's all these things that I've done that are very visibly like away from my community. And I was just like, oh my God, I'm just gonna be pandering to the white gaze. That's what my whole book is gonna be. And I was really, really aware of that, I think, because that's what outwardly manifests with me, I think, when you just the outward thing. And that was the biggest thing. That was my biggest concern, I think. And that was something that really haunted me whilst I was doing it. And I think, alhamdulillah, it hasn't gone that way at all. Like I think everyone has embraced it that I've sent it to. And I think it just speaks true to, like, I've made a certain set of decisions and everyone else will have made their own set of unique decisions. And I think that's what it encapsulates. It's like, this is one set of decisions, but there's so many possibilities. But this is what we all encounter. We all encounter those moments, and they may be slightly different. Those like junctures of crisis, those moments of complete meltdown where you're having to make the decision, where you're having to let go, or you're having to honor something, and you're having to compromise something about yourself. We've all gone through that time and again in so many different instances, and I think that's what the book ends up capturing, really, those crises and how we deal with them.
Yeah, and I really enjoyed, I guess, in the book, seeing the journey that you went on with your faith as well. And I thought it was so honest and so kind of lovely or loving. I don't know what exactly the right word to use is, because I mean, I know, as like myself growing up, my faith wavered, and I had questions that I felt like I wasn't getting the answers to. I didn't feel like I had access to the right information or the right scholars, and it's really, really difficult. And I think some people or some groups within the Muslim community feel like, no, but if you have any doubt, that's a mark of not having faith. But actually, and I think some scholars actually talk about the fact that doubt is the thing that helps grow our faith.
Yeah.
Because if you can overcome your doubt, then it only makes your faith stronger, because you know for sure what you believe or how you feel about what you believe. And I really like the fact that you talked about it, and you talked about it, really quite gently as well. And what came through for me was actually how heartbreaking that was for you. Like there's this bit in the book where you have this conversation with your mum, and you say to your mum, like, Mum, I have to work it out for myself. I have to know that this is the religion for me. And your mum says, okay, well, you can take off your hijab, but make sure you come back. And you're like, well, I don't know if I'm going to come back. And then what happens next is this sort of, like, you call it like a de-hijabing, but it's great. I thought it was really interesting because you didn't just wake up the next day and take it off. It came across in the book as if it was gradual. I don't know if it happened over like days or weeks or months, but it was gradual. And that to me was like, oh my goodness, this is so hard for her. Like it's so difficult, because obviously it had been decades that you'd been wearing the hijab, you'd been identifying as Muslim, and you were having to let go of something just because you weren't sure and you needed to figure it out. And I felt like that was so brave. And I think what I liked about it didn't come across in the book that you were doing it at a point of aggression or hostility. You were really internally struggling. And I think increasingly young Muslims will relate to that so much, because it is difficult, and we're made to feel like sometimes that we shouldn't be questioning and we shouldn't have doubt. But actually Allah has given us the ability to ask questions, because it is the thing that can help us move closer to him or make whatever decision we feel is right. So I thought it was really great.
Oh, thank you, Samia. That was a really hard one to put in, and it was one of the ones that I left towards the end because I was really umming and ahhing over whether I should put it in, but I always knew it had to go in because it was such a big part of my critique of something that I think the reason why I needed it to go in was because it's something that's never made public. Like other than period when I was in exchange with the ex-Muslim community, they were the only group of people that it felt like it was safe to be critical or ask questions.
Mm-hmm.
I lost a lot of Muslim friends in that process of asking questions because they didn't like it. My family got really aggressive with me as well, and really territorial and quite, like defensive. And it was really interesting because there was no space for that other than this one, like completely different group. And it's so interesting because they were in complete opposition of everything. And it sort of fed that feeling of wanting to react for a while. But I think I quickly moved away from it because I realized that I didn't want to be in opposition. I wanted resolution. I wanted to move to a place where I was at peace with myself and at peace with my upbringing. And that might not mean that I go back and I accept it, but I needed to be calm. I didn't want to be in this like reactionary, angry space. And I think that's that a lot of that felt for me. And it felt like a sort of, almost like everyone supporting, like creating a space for each other that wasn't available anywhere else. And it does do that. It does offer that. And I don't know what's going on with them right now, but it's so interesting because that was the only space for me at that time. So it serves a function. And I think, putting it in the book, it was so important to give it another space and actually be able to move beyond that space and be like, where is that third space where you're not just in complete blind acceptance, you're not in complete reaction, but you are just, you can observe from a distance, and you can appreciate, and you can, see what you're feeling, and then be able to sort of just honor your own feelings as well. So I think it was a really interesting thing. And I think, like you said, Sammy, I think a lot of people go through that, but it's all internalized, and there's no space to actually talk about it because there's such a shame around it, I guess. There's a lot of like secrecy and a lot of like a sense of like, why would you question that because you're Muslim? Like, especially when you're visibly Muslim, there's such a pressure to be an ambassador, to uphold and upstand and like be the sort of face of Islam, whether that's like private sisters circles or something. And that's like, I went to a load of those hoping that we'd be able to like create safe space, but there never had been, for me at least.
It's really hard, but I'm so glad that you put it in as well. I think it'll give a lot of people things to reflect on, and also to feel less alone, I think, as well.
And I think also, just going back on that, you can go through this crazy convoluted journey where the end is going back to that exchange with my mum where I don't know where it's going to end, and for it to be something that, I'm not like an alcoholic on the streets and I'm homeless and I'm like jobless, like you are able to sort of let go of those structures, and you can choose to come back, and you can come back in your own as an autonomous individual. You don't have to compromise. You can, you can do it so that it works for you as well. And how does that work for you? And that's very complex. My existence is very complex. It's not easy to navigate, and it's not straightforward. but then nothing ever is.
Exactly.
And,
I have had such a great time talking to you today, and I feel like we could carry on, but it's already been quite a long time. So yeah, thank you so much for joining me today, Sabba. It's been such a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Samia, for having me.
Thank you so much to Sabba for her time and such a brilliant conversation. If you enjoyed this podcast, please follow The Diverse Bookshelf on your podcast platform of choice and connect with me on social media.